Hello and welcome. My name is Professor James Hopkins, and this is just a very short user-friendly video on an introduction to the upper Rio Yaqui Basin. And so, if you've ever been curious and have had any questions that have kept you up late at night about what the Rio Yaqui Basin is, this short video will hopefully put some of those angst to rest. So in this video, I'm going to answer 5 basic questions. First, what is a basin? And where is the Rio Yaqui Basin? And then number 2, where is the upper Rio Yaqui Basin? And number 3, where is the John Slaughter Ranch and the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge? Number 4, where's the Rancho San Bernardino and the Rio San Bernardino and the Cajon Bonito? Finally, number 5, what is the environmental patrimony, the ecology, the significance of the upper Rio Yaqui Basin? Now that's a lot to do in 10 minutes, and again, this is just a quick introduction, so relax, enjoy, grab a latte or some iced tea. Now I've provided a slide here for you to illustrate where the Rio Yaqui Basin is, and also a definition of what a basin is. But a basin, simply put, is a depression in the surface of the earth. Now that surface can be literally at the surface level, like on terra firma, at the ground level, or it can be in the subsurface, or the subterraneo, or the subsurface area. And they can actually coexist. So you can have a basin which consists of multiple depressions in the Earth's surface with multiple surface layers. So imagine like a slice of layered cake, and when you put the knife through, and maybe you might be getting hungry, the layers begin to invert along with the pressure from the knife. And so what you have are several layers, surface layers, that are able to contain, in our case, for our own video's purpose, water. That is why basins are so important. And typically speaking, when I said you have multiple basins, I mean essentially just imagine like a river, and then realize that beneath that surface there's another water table, and there's going to be another source of water, and that's groundwater. Most importantly, it isn't the case that the surface water going one way is moving in concert with the groundwater. They don't always, in fact, go in the same direction. Quite often they actually go in conflicting directions. But the reason why geologists and hydrologists like using the word basin is because it's the basic unit of measurement for this depression in the Earth's surface. So it's a beginning kind of cookie cutter approach to looking at how water works in one kind of integrated unit. And in that sense, an integrated unit is a watershed. So the Rio Yaqui Basin is sometimes referred to as the Rio Yaqui drainage or the Rio Yaqui watershed. And if you look at the map, you'll see that it consists of one large kind of odd pear-shaped landmass consisting primarily in the center of the Rio Yaqui, and then dozens of tributary rivers that flow typically into it to establish greater headwaters. And so you'll see that it starts, it originates actually from several sources. One is in the United States, that originated from surface water inflow. We'll talk a little bit about that with the Rio San Bernardino and the Black Draw. And then Chihuahua. Many of Sonora's rivers are actually sourced from northwestern Chihuahua. Now the important thing for our purposes to understand is that if you have a basin, like a big depression in the Earth's surface that holds water, you can understand that it also is the sum of the whole. So if scientists are trying to look at one area and begin to break it down into smaller pieces, if you're using basins as the unit of measurement, then what you'll find is, you'll see in this other slide, is you'll have what are known as sub-basins. And I think this is where it can be confusing, because it's almost a name of convenience. The idea, however, is that there's some type of connection, surface and groundwater flow, between these regions that make them one large basin. But in fact, with the Yaqui Basin, you'll see here in this map that it consists of three easy to identify sub-basins. So for our purposes, we're just going to be focusing on the upper Rio Yaqui Basin. And that consists of the headwaters, both at the surface and groundwater level, that originate in the United States. So that's the northernmost portion or region of the upper Yaqui Basin. So I just want to stop here for a second and quickly summarize what we've just reviewed. First, we know that geologists and hydrologists like to use this idea of a basin as a unit of measurement to define a distinct or discrete geological depression in the Earth's surface that contains water. We know that it can contain water literally at the surface level, but it can also contain water, and indeed does contain water, in the subsurface. So that's groundwater. And those two segments or volumes of water, they aren't necessarily integrated, meaning they're not necessarily moving in the same way. They don't have to, it shouldn't be presumed, but there is some clear relationship. A really easy example is the following. So we're looking at the upper Rio Yaqui Basin, and again, we take a big basin and we start breaking it down into smaller basins, right? So the Rio Yaqui Basin has three sub-basins, upper, middle, and lower. In the upper basin, what we find are a number of springs that come from and are sourced from the groundwater table, and those are perennial. They are year-round, and they just pump large amounts of groundwater naturally into the surface area. A long time ago, that would help recharge and replenish the surface water basin. And in this case, I'm talking specifically about a river called the Rio San Bernardino. In the United States today, the Rio San Bernardino, which you will see highlighted very vaguely, we'll get into more detail in other slides, but you'll see it right at the border. It's just a little line that crosses the border above that red marker. It's also highlighted in the San Bernardino Valley Basin. This gets more confusing, and I'll explain that in a moment. That little rouge chunk in the corner, one of the little squiggly lines, is what used to be the Rio San Bernardino. But in fact now, what it's called in the United States is the Black Draw. Part of the reason why people don't know much about the Rio Yaqui Basin is because it's a transboundary basin. It's cut in half, not cut in half, but it's cut in between by the international border. And only a small portion of it is based in the United States. And as I said, the surface flow is gone. The Rio San Bernardino, as a fully functioning, perennial, year-round river, crashed sometime in the late 1880s due to a number of factors: mining, overgrazing, etc. But what we have on the Sonora side is something very interesting, and we also have the label that still exists, which is the Rio San Bernardino proper. Okay, so we'll get into that in more detail, but I just wanted to highlight again that basins are made up of sub-basins. We're looking at the upper Rio Yaqui Basin, and in this slide, in talking about the Black Draw and the Rio San Bernardino, which are really two of the same, they were connected but then subsequently divided by the border, and then further this ecological catastrophe that happened, which basically removed the river's north-south flow So its southern flow no longer exists. On the US side, it's just an empty wash. And then once you get down into Sonora, it begins to rebuild again, partially through these natural springs and then some conservation efforts by landowners. And the reason why I mention this again is because, guess what? We get into more sub-basins. So in Arizona and in the United States, the upper Rio Yaqui Basin is viewed as a series of sub-basins within each state's jurisdiction. And so Arizona refers to the upper Rio Yaqui Basin through a collection of sub-basins, and the one that I'm focusing on here is the San Bernardino Valley Basin. That is the basin that is most relevant. You can actually see it when you go out to the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge. You can see the depression in the Earth's surface. It's clearly visible. So hopefully we've learned a little bit there, and what I'd like to do now is just move along to this next image. This map is an interesting map because it also shows some of the interesting ecological highlights of the basin. And I'm not going to be able to get into an extended discussion on the ecology of the upper Rio Yaqui Basin, except to say that it's essential to keep in mind that it is unique. It has a number of unique geological features that support an ecology that cannot be found anywhere else in the world. And because of that, you will find Yaqui indigenous species that are truly indigenous to this area. So on this map, if you take a closer look, it may not be the most appealing map, but what its significance is showing what's called the Sky Island ecology. And this is in reference to the elevation that can be had on these various peaks, which in turn support unique and isolated ecosystems, typically characterized by coniferous trees. So we're talking about ponderosa pine, etc. So hopefully that wasn't too much and you're still with me. So hang in there. Go grab some popcorn, sprinkle some cheese on it, or it's pretty hot out, go get an iced tea, and we'll start the next video in a moment. Thank you.